So there's compost. I think I showed you guys that last video. I guess it's like part 2.5. A few things I wanted to emphasize and elaborate on. First things first. That was algae, not moss. That I showed y'all earlier. One is if you get kicked out, like when you're 18, like you like legitimately get kicked out. Like I've seen videos where parents will like give their child like at least or like a 10 or something. Focusing on the positive, not the negative. And trying to like see things in a different light. I left out some tools. I put those tools in a pile, and I'm not really trying to pick them up and categorize them and stuff right now. So negatively, I'm thinking like, oh shit. I don't want to have to get bitched out about that, but in a good way, it's like, all right, well, at least they'll get put up. And I get that that's small. It's not big. You're looking for like a place to live now. But trying to find that positive, like, all right. Maybe I was in a toxic situation, so maybe now I have the opportunity to get out. And like I said, sticking to that path, sticking to that lane. I would say stay close, don't go too far. If you have other family members, I would say reach out to them and talk to them about it. I wouldn't say like try to be negative, try to be positive and be like, hey, they need some space. They need whatever it is for whatever reason why. I need somewhere to go. I'd like somewhere to stay, and hopefully in that regard you can stay close by and you don't have to go too far because you don't know. In a few months or so, they may be like, hey, I'd like you to come back. And that may not seem like a good opportunity at first, but in retrospect, down the line, thinking long term, you may be like, dang, maybe I should have taken that opportunity. So sometimes it's like that pivotal moment where you're like, shoot, let me take that leap of faith and let me move back in. That might be something that comes up, just like trying to keep it simple, just something I'm trying to do. Moss, not algae. But anyways, get a job, find somewhere to stay, find somewhere to sleep, save up, have a plan, try to keep it somewhat simple, try not to go too far, try not to do too much, and try to think positive and not negative, and try to be able to like combine that realisticness with that positivity. Like if you have someone at work that, they may seem negative, but they say they're realistic, that might be a blessing in disguise because you might be able to, take that positivity that you have and combine it with that realism, right? That's what I was talking about earlier, that yin and yang. In that negativity, there's going to be some positivity, and in that positivity, there's going to be some negativity. So maybe you're too negative and you need to focus on that little bit of positive, or maybe you're too positive and you need to focus on that little bit of negative. So either way, just trying to like find that positive and come back to that realistic part of it, because it's definitely, I'm not going to say it's as easy as it sounds, and I wish I had like just like an easy solution for something like that. And I guess the easy solution for something like that really would be just to try to stick through that negativity, that toxicity, if at all possible, and try not to go too far. Try not to just like run to a different state or run to a different country or run to another town, but kind of like try to stay where you are. That way you can work with what you do have, and try to like uplift the community instead of expecting another community to kind of just like adopt you and make everything all right. Like I said, if you do have resources, try to like reach out to those resources and try to see if they can help you, and hopefully it's someone close by. That way you don't have to go too far. That way, if they say, hey, I'd like you to come back, then you can come back, and just another little tidbit. If you're young, try to save up. Just try to save up. I mean, hey, again, calling their bluff. Maybe you might have to sleep in the backyard for a little bit. You got that job, keep going to work. Even if if there are some nights you don't get no sleep, even if there are some nights where, you gotta like sleep on the back porch or some shit, but like just trying to like stick around and like, I'm not just saying so much like making it happen, or like, trying to like push something as much as just sticking around, kind of like being optimistic, if you will, in a way, positive but realistic, that type of thing, and coming to like that optimal. And then another thing I wanted to elaborate and emphasize on was relationships. That's another thing I touched on a little bit, is that subtlety. I wish, like in retrospect, I wish I would have stayed in that. And it's kind of hard to see that when you don't see the alternative, because you're not living in that you're not living that alternative. You're not living in that alternative universe where you did stay with that person. You're not living in that alternative universe where you left that person. So like, let's say you do stick in that relationship, you might be like, man, this shit kind of sucks. This shit's kind of whack. But you don't realize how much worse off or how much better off you could be otherwise. And that's kind of like saying, like, sticking to like what's known. That way you can like really find that inner light, that light in that community that you have, in that family that you have. Because I feel like if everybody did that in the world, we would honestly live in a better place, as long as they can stick to that positive mindset while also keeping that realism in mind, right? And not getting too caught up on the negative, not getting too caught up on the positive, but trying to stick to the positive so that you can have that realism, that, realisticness. So, if I would have stayed in one of those relationships, I feel like it would be better off. Even if I would have kept talking to Shorty, and I'm not saying don't give yourself some grace, because I was going through it, and I wasn't really in the position to be like, taking care of anybody. I was trying to take care of myself, especially after, how she did me. But if I would have stayed in that situation, she'd probably be better off. You see what I'm saying? And that it's like that boomerang effect. Eventually that will like come back to you, and because you helped them out, that positivity will come back. Even if it's not like direct, it will like eventually circle back, because that will uplift their community, and because that circle kind of like encompasses your circle. Now that's like in your community, so now their community is uplifting, and now your community is uplifting. It's like, it kind of like overlaps and kind of like trickles over, or kind of like seeps over. So trying to bring it back. If I would have stayed in those relationships, I think long term, things will be better off, even though I may not have seen that subtlety, right? And it's hard when you're in these situations to really be able to like step back and see the big picture and compare yourself to that alternative universe, right? Because that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to like look and see, like, envision like this alternative universe where I would have stayed in those relationships, and how that would have ended, or how that would have worked out. And it's like, man, like, what I do know is that I would still have someone. I'd still be there. I'd still have something, and maybe it wouldn't have worked out, and maybe that would have been for the best. Maybe that would have been a learning opportunity, but at least you can sit there and be like, okay, I stuck around, I did my best, I tried to make it work, whereas if you just leave, you try to, hop over to something else, it may not be as rainbows and sunshine as you were expecting. So yeah, simply, trying to simplify it. You may not realize the subtlety. You may not realize what you could have had until you don't have it. So just trying to like stick around and appreciate and be grateful for what you do have, because you may not realize what you will not have until you don't, right? So that's just getting into like the relationship aspect, and like I said, there might be some that may correlate in a way to like family dynamics too, and trying to just to stick around and realize that like, hey, I have this structure, and I may not realize the subtlety, and I may not realize how much it does for me until I'm gone, until I hit that low. And something I was saying in that last video is, a lot of times you don't see that in the short term, and I'm not talking, and like when I say short term, I mean like a year from now, right? Like if you're young like me, that might be like, well, a year is a long time. No, I'm talking about like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a decade. It might be like a decade later before you look back and you're like, fuck. Now with all this experience and all this wisdom, I think I should have. So that's why I'm saying, like, try your best to stick around, try your best to do your best, and even if people don't recognize that you're working your ass off, because I realize that like a lot of times, it just seems like that hard work, just that nitty gritty, that hard work just doesn't seem to like pay off. But I'm telling you, it's that subtlety that's not realized until it's gone. And sometimes you might be that positive force, but that's where I was saying, like, kind of try to be grateful for those people that you might think are negative, that might say they're realistic, because you might be able to combine your positivity with their realism, right? It's like I was saying, like, you might want to be an artist, they might want you to go to college, so you try to think, inside the box, outside the box. Okay, let me do some marketing, right? And then I can combine that creative element with that, business element, and then I got like some creative marketing, right? So I just wanted to, make a part 2.5, if you will, in a way I could like, emphasize and elaborate on some of those other aspects that I don't think I really made as coherent as I would like to have. So anyways, just I guess like the 3 core principles that I'm like kind of encompassing upon, or outlining in a way, is trying to like stick around and stay on that path that you have, and like stay to those plans, even if they're not your own plans, even if they're plans someone else made for you. That way you can help them and they can help you, even if you have to work through like a lot of toxicity. 2, when you stick to that path, right? Stick to that path, stick to those plans. A lot of times your plans will end up coming to fruition, even if it's just subtle and you don't really realize it. 3, just because they're not right in the head doesn't mean you're right in the head. And I think those are like the 3 big topics that I was trying to like, expand upon. That way I could condense and then simplify it into like a, bonds in way, something that's like, available, understandable, applicable. But yeah, hopefully that gives you guys some insight. That's just a little bit of, my life experience, a little bit of my wisdom, and a little bit of, some of those things that I wish I would have done, and I wish I would have stuck to, and, hopefully I myself can stick to those things too, so yeah. hope all is well. I hope y'all have a blessed day. And, good luck.